In 1971, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention released an album called Just Another Band from L.A. On it was a sprawling 25-minute track called Billy the Mountain, a bizarre satirical epic filled with inside jokes about Southern California culture. And buried in that song, sandwiched between references to funny cars, Irondale, and the City of Industry, Zappa drops a name that every drag racing fan in California would have recognized instantly: Big John Mazmanian. Think about that. Frank Zappa, one of the most iconoclastic musicians of the 20th century, thought this Armenian-American drag racer from East Los Angeles was such a cultural touchstone that he immortalized him in song. But here's what most people don't know. Before Big John became famous for his nitro-burning funny cars, before he became a household name at Irondale Speedway, he built what many consider the single most beautiful gasser ever to turn a wheel. A 1941 Willys coupe, candy apple red, chrome everywhere, and underneath that gleaming hood, a salvage yard Chrysler Hemi he'd bought for $50. This is the story of how a World War II veteran, wounded in one of the bloodiest naval battles in history, came home to build a racing empire that changed drag racing forever. And it all started with a color. Part 1. The Making of a Giant. The East LA Kid. John Mazmanian was born on May 18, 1926, in East Los Angeles. His family was Armenian, part of the diaspora that had fled the genocide in the Ottoman Empire just a decade earlier. They'd settled in the sprawling Armenian community of East LA, where John would grow up surrounded by the sounds of a new nation being built, the clatter of industry, the rumble of engines, the promise of speed. You have to understand what East LA was like for a kid like John in the 1930s. The streets were filled with the sounds of commerce, the rumble of trucks, the clang of metalwork, the shouts of merchants. Armenian families had clustered together in neighborhoods where they could speak their own language, cook their own food, and maintain the traditions that genocide had tried to erase. But the kids? The kids were American, pure California. And in California, cars were everything. Even as a kid, John stood out, literally. By the time he hit high school at Garfield High, he'd already grown to 6'5", a towering presence that earned him the nickname that would stick for life: Big John. He excelled at football, which surprised no one. At 6'5" and over 200 pounds, he dominated the field. His coaches saw a potential college athlete, maybe even professional material if he kept developing. But what those coaches didn't know was that their star player was already in love with something faster than any running back could ever be: cars. At 14 years old, 14, John Mazmanian walked into his auto shop class with a rusted-out 1932 Ford and a vision. Most kids that age could barely handle basic maintenance. John saw that decrepit heap and imagined what it could become. Over the course of that school year, with guidance from a shop teacher who recognized the extraordinary talent, John transformed that junkyard refugee into a gleaming highboy roadster. Not just functional, beautiful. Even at 14, John had an eye for aesthetics that would define his entire career. He wasn't old enough to drive legally. Didn't matter. The car bug had bit deep, and it would never let go. By junior high, he'd already bought a 1930 Model A coupe for $25 and built it into his first project car. That experience taught him the fundamentals: how to work with what you had, how to make something from nothing, how to see potential where others saw junk. In high school, he upgraded to a chopped 1939 Mercury with a Carson top, DeSoto bumpers, and black paint over a red interior. This was no amateur build. The Carson top was a custom job that required real skill. The DeSoto bumpers were a style choice that showed John's developing sense of aesthetics. Put it in overdrive, and that thing would do 100 easy, John would later recall. After graduation, John even attended college to pursue a mechanical engineering degree.
He wanted to understand the science behind what he was building, but theory could only hold his attention for so long. He had a 32 Highboy Roadster by then, and he was taking it to the streets. There were no legal drag strips in those days. If you wanted to race, you found a straight stretch of road and you ran. John and his buddies would wait until the cops went home, then line up their cars and settle arguments the only way that mattered, with a standing start and a finish line. He also took the Roadster out to El Mirage Dry Lake, where hot rodders had been chasing speed records since the 1930s. On that flat, sun-baked expanse, John's 32 clocked 118 miles per hour in early 1942. For a high school kid's home-built car, that was flying. But this was 1942. The world was at war, and John Mazmanian was about to learn that there were things faster and more dangerous than hot rods.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, John Mazmanian was 15 years old. By the time he graduated high school, America was deep into the Pacific Campaign, and young men were enlisting by the thousands. John enlisted in the Navy. He could have stayed stateside, could have worked his mechanical skills in a motor pool or a shipyard. His knowledge of engines was already exceptional for his age. The Navy would have been happy to keep him turning wrenches in San Diego or Long Beach. Instead, he found himself aboard a vessel sailing into one of the largest naval battles in human history. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 1944. To understand what John Mazmanian lived through, you need to understand the scale. For 4 days, from October 23 to October 26, 1944, the American and Japanese fleets clashed across thousands of square miles of the Philippine Sea. The Americans brought over 200 ships. The Japanese committed nearly everything they had left. It was Japan's desperate attempt to stop the Allied liberation of the Philippines. If they failed, the war was essentially lost. So they threw everything into the fight, including kamikaze attacks, which made their debut in this battle. Over 200,000 sailors fought across 4 separate engagements: the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea, the Battle of Surigao Strait, the battle off Cape Engano, and the battle off Samar, where a small American escort carrier group faced down a Japanese battleship fleet in one of the most one-sided surface actions of the war. When it was over, more than 12,500 sailors were dead, most of them Japanese, but thousands of Americans died too, and thousands more were wounded. John Mazmanian was there when the shells started flying. He took shrapnel. The wounds were serious enough to mark him, to require medical attention, to remind him for the rest of his life what he'd survived. But he made it home. A lot of guys didn't. The men who died at Leyte Gulf didn't get to build hot rods, didn't get to see their cars roll down a drag strip, didn't get to grow old surrounded by family and friends. John never forgot that. Never forgot that his second chance at life wasn't guaranteed. It was a gift bought with the blood of his shipmates. When he finally came home to East Los Angeles, the war still echoing in his mind, he had a choice to make. What would he do with the life he'd been given? The answer was never really in doubt. When John came back from the Pacific, he could have done anything. Could have taken his mechanical skills into aerospace, into the defense industry, into any of a dozen careers that were booming in post-war California. Instead, he went back to the thing that had captured his heart before the war ever started: hot rods. But here's what nobody expected. The wounded veteran was about to build something that would make him more famous than any of those other paths ever could have. And it all started with his family's garbage business. The Armenian Army. After the war, John came home to East LA and did what a lot of returning veterans did. He got married, started a family, and went to work. But the Mazmanians weren't working at a factory or an office. They were in waste management, the garbage business.
And in post-war Los Angeles, where the population was exploding and suburban sprawl was consuming the orange groves, garbage was good business. Very good business. The family enterprise thrived, and John worked hard. He built a life, had kids, became a respectable businessman. But on weekends were different. In 1957, John walked onto a car lot and bought himself a Ford Fairline. Not just any Fairline. This one came with a factory supercharged 312 cubic inch V8. During the week, it was the family car. Alice Mazmanian would drive it to the market, take the kids to school. Come Saturday, John would doctor it up a bit and head for the dragstrip. This was the beginning of something special, because John didn't just want to race, he wanted to race in style. And that meant candy apple red. It always meant candy apple red. Part 2. The Corvette Years. The Red Rocket. By 1961, John had moved up from the family sedan to something with a bit more potential, a 1961 Corvette. It was red, of course, red with fuel injection, a 287 cubic inch V8, 4-speed manual, and POSA traction. Straight off the showroom floor, it was a serious piece of machinery, but John saw potential. He registered it for C-Stock class and enlisted his nephew, Rich Siranuyan, to drive. Rich was young, hungry, and most importantly, fearless. At the 1961 NHRA Winter Nationals in Pomona, the team showed up with their candy red Corvette and proceeded to win their class. They set an AASP speed record in 12.94 seconds at 109.96 miles per hour. Not bad for a stock-bodied sports car. But John wasn't satisfied. He never was. Over the next 2 years, the Corvette evolved. The 287 became a 327 thanks to a stroker crank. The factory blower was swapped for a massive 6-71 GMC supercharger. The class designation climbed from C-Stock to AASP to BMSP. The car got faster and more beautiful, because that was Big John's signature. His cars weren't just quick, they were show cars. Chrome everywhere, paint deep enough to swim in, every bolt polished, every detail perfect. In 1963, Rich Siranuyan got drafted into the Army. His co-driver, a skinny guy they called Bones Ballou, took over the driving duties full-time. And John was already thinking about what came next.
Here's something you need to understand about drag racing in 1963. The gasser classes were exploding in popularity. These weren't the nitro-burning top-fuel dragsters that would later dominate the sport. Gassers were supposed to be streetable machines, at least in theory. They ran on gasoline, hence the name, had to maintain their stock bodies, and were classified by weight and engine displacement. But by the early 60s, the top gasser teams had turned these street cars into pure race machines, with straight axles, jacked up front ends, and supercharged engines making over 600 horsepower. The cars that dominated? 1941 Willys coupes. Light, short wheelbase, cheap, and with that nose-high stance that made them look like they were doing a wheelie even standing still. John watched Stone, Woods, and Cook, Ohio George Montgomery, K.S. Pittman, and Junior Thompson battle it out at tracks across California. He watched the crowds go crazy for these fat-fendered coupes, and he made a decision. The Corvette had to go. In 1964, John Mazmanian sold his beloved Corvette and bought a battered 1941 Willys coupe. Everyone in the Southern California racing scene knew about Big John's candy red Vette. It was one of the most beautiful cars on the circuit. What would he do with an ugly old Willys? The answer would change the gasser wars forever. And it started with a trip to a wrecking yard and $50 in cash. When John Mazmanian acquired his 1941 Willys coupe in early 1964, the gasser world was dominated by Oldsmobile power. Stone, Woods, and Cook ran a blown Olds, so did Ohio George, K.S. Pittman, and most of the top teams. The Oldsmobile was the safe choice. Everyone knew how to build them. Parts were readily available. You could buy a crate engine and drop it in. John looked at the Oldsmobiles everyone else was running. Then he looked at something different, the Chrysler 392 Hemi. Now, you need to understand why this was such a radical decision. The Chrysler 392 Hemi was a legendary engine, sure. Don Garlitz was running them in top fuel. The nitro guys loved them. But in a gasser, running on pump gas, that was unusual. The Hemi had more potential, John believed. Those hemispherical combustion chambers breathed better than the Oldsmobile's wedge design. With the right modifications, the Hemi could make serious power on gasoline, maybe more than the Olds ever could. But there was a problem. Chrysler Hemis weren't cheap. A new 392 would cost more than most complete race cars. So John went to a wrecking yard. I went to a wrecking yard and bought a used Chrysler Hemi for $50, John would later tell reporters, and Bones built the engine up at Iskandarian's. That sentence doesn't sound revolutionary until you understand the context. Iski, or Iski to everyone in racing, ran one of the most famous cam grinding operations in the country. His shop on Slauson Avenue in Los Angeles was the beating heart of Southern California's speed industry. Legends walked through those doors. Ideas were born there. Technology that would shape drag racing for decades was developed in that cramped, noisy building. And Bones, Bob Below, John's driver, was one of Iski's employees. Bob Bones Below earned his nickname the obvious way. He was skinny as a rail, all angles and edges. But what he lacked in bulk, he made up for in skill. Bones was a genuine engine man, one of the best fabricators and builders on the West Coast, and he knew his way around a Chrysler. Together, at Iski's shop, with access to the best camshafts, lifters, and valve train components in the business, they transformed that junkyard Hemi into a monster. First, they bored and stroked it to 467 cubic inches. That's nearly 100 more cubes than the stock 392. They used a stroker crank, oversized pistons, the works. Then came the supercharger, a GMC 671 blower, the same unit that powered city buses, mounted on top of that massive Hemi. They built a custom intake manifold, added Hilborn fuel injection, and tuned everything until the engine screamed. When they finally strapped it to the dynamometer, the numbers came back, 824 horsepower. 824 horsepower from a $50 engine. To put that in perspective, a brand new 1964 Corvette made about 375 horsepower in its hottest trim. The typical family car made maybe 200. Big John's Hemi was making double what the fastest production cars could manage. This was the secret weapon. While everyone else was running Oldsmobiles, perfecting the known, Big John was about to unleash Chrysler power on the gasser wars. The revolution was about to begin.
March 1964. The NHRA March meet at Famoso Raceway in Bakersfield. If you've never been to Famoso, it's hard to describe the atmosphere of that track. Sitting in the flat agricultural land outside Bakersfield, surrounded by nothing but fields and orchards and the distant shimmer of the Sierra Nevada mountains, Famoso was pure hot rod territory. The track had hosted some of the most legendary runs in drag racing history, and the March meet had become one of the most anticipated events on the calendar. The fans packed the stands to watch the gasser classes. Stone, Woods, and Cook were the favorites. They'd just won the Winter Nationals a few weeks earlier with their black Swindler Willys, running 10.03 at 142.85 miles per hour. Doug "Cookie" Cook had wheeled that Oldsmobile-powered coupe to victory after victory. The black Swindler was the car to beat. Everyone knew Big John had a new combination. The candy-red Willys had been at the Winter Nationals, too, and people had noticed the different engine under the hood. But numbers are what count in drag racing. Until you prove it on the track, all you have is speculation. Nobody was ready for what Big John brought. When the Willys rolled into the staging lanes for its first pass, the exhaust note was different. deeper, more aggressive. That Hemi didn't sound like an Oldsmobile. It sounded hungry. With Bones Ballou behind the wheel and that new 467-inch Hemi screaming through the blower, the candy-red Willys launched off the line. The front end lifted, the tires bit, and the car shot down the track like it was running from something. 9.77 seconds at 149 miles per hour. The timing lights confirmed what the crowd already knew. This wasn't just fast. This was a new era. Remember, Stone Woods Cook had just won the Winter Nationals, running 10.03. Big John had just beaten that by nearly 0.3 of a second. In drag racing terms, that's not a marginal improvement. That's domination. The word spread through the pits like wildfire. The Hemi is faster. The Oldsmobile is dead. Mazmanian has figured something out. That single run changed everything. Suddenly, the Oldsmobile was yesterday's news. Every serious gasser team in the country started shopping for Chrysler Hemis. Phone calls went out to engine builders. Trips were made to wrecking yards. The paradigm had shifted. But John wasn't done. Not even close. He was just getting started. Fred Stone, co-owner of the Stone Woods and Cook team, was not a man who took losing lightly. After watching Big John's Hemi destroy his Olds-powered swindler, Stone did something that would escalate the rivalry to legendary status. He took out an advertisement in Drag News. These weren't ordinary ads. The racing tabloids of the 1960s, Drag News, National Dragster, Drag Times, Drag World, were filled with provocative advertisements from camshaft manufacturers, transmission builders, and race teams. They were trash talk in print, bragging rights for sale. Fred Stone's ad was a direct challenge. Put up or shut up. Meet us at Lyons Dragstrip. 2 out of 3. Let's settle this. Big John accepted. The match was set for early May 1964 at Lyons Associated Dragstrip, the legendary beach on Long Beach Harbor. The pre-race hype was enormous. Both teams bought ads. The camshaft companies, Engel backing Stone Woods and Cook, Iskandarian backing Mazmanian, joined the fray with their own promotional salvos. Big June all shook up over losing the big one to SWC, screamed one Engel ad. Big June, that's what they called John in the tabloid wars. Big June versus Stone Woods and Cook. The gasser fans couldn't wait.
The night of the match, Lyons Dragstrip was packed to capacity and beyond. Lyons Associated Dragstrip, the beach to everyone who raced there, sat on Long Beach Harbor property, surrounded by oil refineries and industrial warehouses. It wasn't pretty. The facilities were basic at best, but it had something no other track could match: atmosphere. The night air was heavy with the smell of nitro, rubber, and salt from the harbor. The stands were jammed with spectators who'd paid their admission, knowing they were about to witness something special. The pre-race advertising had done its job. Everybody in Southern California who cared about gassers was there. Both teams had their cars gleaming in the pits. Stone Woods and Cook's Black Swindler, its paint so deep it seemed to absorb light. Big John's Candy Red Willys, glowing under the track lights like a ruby. First round, Bones Ballou in the Candy Red Willys versus Doug Cookie Cook in the Black Swindler. Two of the best drivers in the country, two of the best cars, 1/4 mile to prove who was king. The tree lit, yellow, 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 green. Both cars launched. The roar was deafening. Two supercharged engines screaming at redline, tires clawing for traction, exhaust flames lighting up the night. The cars stayed side by side for the first 100 feet, then the Red Willys started to pull away. At the top end, the timing boards told the story. 9.91 for Mazmanian, 9.96 for Stone Woods and Cook. 0.05 of a second, that's how close it was, but 0.05 was enough. Round 1 to Big John. Second round,
The crowd barely had time to catch their breath before the cars were back in the staging lanes. Cookie Cook hadn't become a legend by giving up. He knew his car, he knew the track, and he knew he'd left something on the table in that first run. When the lights dropped, Cookie was gone. His reaction time was almost perfect. He launched the instant green showed. Bones was a fraction late, and in drag racing, fractions are everything. Cook took round 2. The crowd went absolutely crazy. This was what they'd paid for. This was the drama, the theater, the unbearable tension of match racing at its finest. It all came down to the final pass. 2 Willys coupes, 2 supercharged engines, 1 winner. The cars staged. The crowd fell silent. You could hear the engines idling, that menacing burble of massive displacement and forced induction barely contained. The tree lit. Yellow, 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 green. The details of that final run have been argued about for 60 years. Did Bones get a better light? Did Cookie spin the tires? Was it the tune-up, the weather, the pressure? What everyone agrees on is this: the crowd went absolutely insane. The noise, the smoke, the drama of 2 rivals separated by hundredths of a second. This was everything drag racing was supposed to be. The gasser wars were officially underway, and Big John Mazmanian was right in the middle of them. That showdown at Lions was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, Big John Mazmanian and his candy red Willys would become the most photographed, most talked about, and most imitated gasser in America. But what really set Big John apart wasn't just his driving or his engines. It was something that happened in the pits, something that earned his team a nickname that would stick forever: the Armenian Army, and it involved shish kebabs. Keith Black was one of the premier engine builders in drag racing. His shop turned out horsepower for dozens of top fuel and funny car teams. He'd seen every kind of racing operation, from shoestring budgets to factory-backed programs. But when he looked at the Mazmanian pit area, he saw something different. The Armenian Army, Black called them. It wasn't just the cars, though those were immaculate. It wasn't just the equipment, though that was first-rate. It was the hospitality. At every race, the Mazmanian team would set up a portable grill and start cooking, Armenian shish kebabs sizzling over charcoal. The smell would drift across the pits, drawing competitors and fans alike. Big John would wave them over. "Come eat," he'd say. Friend or rival, it didn't matter. If you were hungry, there was food. This wasn't normal race team behavior. This was family. This was community. This was the Armenian way of doing things, transplanted from East Los Angeles to every drag strip in America. Competitors who just lost to the candy red Willys would find themselves standing in John's pit, eating kebabs and talking about engines. The rivalry stayed on the track. In the pits, everyone was welcome.
While the hospitality drew people in, it was the car that kept them staring. Big John's 1941 Willys wasn't just fast, it was a rolling work of art. And that wasn't an accident. John understood something that a lot of racers didn't. Appearance matters. Start with the paint. Candy apple red, applied in layer after layer after layer. John didn't just want red paint, he wanted depth. He wanted you to feel like you could reach into that paint and your hand would disappear into infinite crimson. The process took days. Primer, color coat after color coat, clear coat after clear coat, wet sanding between each application, then polish until you could see your reflection from 20 feet away. Every piece of chrome was polished to a mirror finish: the valve covers, the blower drive, the injector scoop, the headers. Things that would be covered in grease and soot after a single pass down the track. They started the day looking like jewelry. Gold leaf lettering spelled out sponsors and class designations with the precision of a master sign painter, because that's exactly who applied it. These weren't stick-on decals. This was hand-laid gold leaf, an art form that dated back centuries, applied to a drag racing car. The engine bay looked like a display case at Tiffany's. You could eat off that engine. Not that you'd want to, not after a pass at 150 miles per hour, but before the first run of the day, immaculate. This wasn't ego, it was strategy. We used these ads to chum up match race interest, John explained, and to increase sponsor involvement. Here's how it worked. A pretty car got photographed, period. When the magazine guys and tabloid photographers walked through the pits, they pointed their cameras at the cars that looked best. They couldn't help it. A gleaming, candy-red Willys with chrome everywhere was simply more photogenic than a primered beater. Photographs got printed in magazines, Hot Rod, Carcraft, Drag News. Every week, the tabloids featured the cars that caught the eye of photographers, and Big John's Willys was always catching eyes. Magazine coverage attracted sponsors. Companies that sold speed equipment wanted their products associated with success and style. A parts manufacturer would rather have their decal on a beautiful candy red car than on something that looked like it had been dragged behind a truck. Sponsors paid for better parts. Speed costs money. When Iskenderian or B&M or Hilborn wanted to showcase their product, they provided their best stuff to the teams that gave them the best exposure. Better parts made the car faster, obvious, and a faster, prettier car got more photographs. It was a virtuous cycle, and Big John rode it all the way to the top. He wasn't just building a race car, he was building a brand. Decades before anyone used that word in racing, John Mazmanian understood the power of image. Through 1964 and 1965, the Candy Red Willys was nearly unbeatable. The team cycled through drivers. Bones Below gave way to Dick Bourgeois, who was eventually joined by Hugh Tucker. Each brought different skills, but all benefited from John's meticulous preparation and that monstrous Hemi. In 1965, Big John's Willys set both ends of the NHRA A-gas supercharged national record, 9.71 seconds at 152.28 miles per hour. Think about that. A 1941 economy car, a vehicle originally powered by a 63-horsepower flathead, was now running 152 miles per hour on gasoline. The stock body, with its curved fenders and upright grille, had never been designed for aerodynamics. It was about as slippery as a brick. But John made it work through sheer horsepower and perfect preparation. The car appeared on the cover of Hot Rod magazine. Revell released a model kit, and it became one of their best-selling kits for years. Every kid who built plastic models in America knew about Big John's Willys. The tabloid advertising battles reached their peak during this period. Iskenderian and Engel, the two biggest camshaft manufacturers, used their sponsored teams as proxies in an ongoing war of words. Every week, new ads appeared in Drag News. Who is the number 3 gas coupe in the nation, Ohio George or Big John? Flash, George Montgomery A-gas supercharged winner at Indy. Who's drinking their milk from the hind faucet now? The insults flew. The nicknames multiplied. Big John became Big June. Stone Woods and Cook became Pebble, Pulp, and Chef. Ohio George was just Ohio George, but his ads gave as good as they got. For the fans, it was theater. Appointment reading every week when the new tabloid came out. Whose car was faster? Who'd won the latest showdown? What fresh insult had been hurled across the printed page? The match race promoters loved it. A guy named Ben Christ started booking national tours featuring the top gasser teams. Mazmanian, Stonewoods Cook, K.S. Pittman, Ohio George, Junior Thompson, they'd caravan across the country, putting on shows at drag strips from California to Connecticut. For the first time, gasser drivers were making real money. Not top fuel money, but enough to make racing a viable career instead of just an expensive hobby. Big John was at the center of it all. By 1966, the Candy Red Willys had become the most famous gasser in America. Model kits, magazine covers, sold-out shows wherever it appeared. But the world was changing. Funny cars were coming. The NHRA was about to allow late model bodies in the gas classes, and Big John Mazmanian, always the showman, always thinking ahead, was about to make a decision that would shock the gasser world. The Willys had to go. Again. 1966 was the beginning of the end for traditional gassers. Funny cars, those bizarre flip-top nitro burners with their stretched wheelbases and fiberglass bodies, were drawing the big crowds now. Top-fuel dragsters were faster than ever, and the NHRA was making changes that would doom the classic Willys coupes. First came the foreign bodies. Starting in 1965, cars like Austin sedans and English Fords were allowed to compete in the gas classes. These were lighter and more aerodynamic than the old American iron. Then came the late model rule. By 1967, brand new Mustangs, Camaros, and Corvettes could run an A-gas supercharged. Ohio George Montgomery saw it coming early. He abandoned his beloved 33 Willys for a sleek Mustang fastback. Stone, Woods, and Cook followed suit. Big John watched and calculated. The Willys was sold. Exactly when and to whom remains uncertain. John would later say he tried to track it down but could never find it. "I would buy it back in a minute if I found it," he told interviewers decades later. But in 1967, sentiment couldn't outweigh practicality. John needed a new weapon. He chose an Austin. The 1967 Big John Mazmanian Austin was unlike anything the gasser world had seen. Ron Screama of Exhibition Engineering built the chassis, a state-of-the-art piece with coil-over front suspension that looked more like a funny car than a traditional gasser. Gil Ayala, one of the premier customizers in Los Angeles, chopped the roof. Anderson Industries supplied fiberglass front end, doors, and deck lid to save weight. When they were done, the car looked like nothing else on the circuit. That chopped, rounded body earned it a nickname instantly, the football. Candy red, of course, gold leaf lettering, chrome everywhere. Big John wasn't about to abandon his aesthetic. The NHRA took one look at it and said no, too radical for A-gas supercharged competition. The football would have to run as BB altered at NHRA events. John didn't care. By 1967, most of the money was in match racing anyway, and the football was fast. On early shakedown runs, it clocked 8.92 seconds at 158.71 miles per hour. He teamed up with Junior Thompson, who put Mazmanian livery on his own Austin. The two cars toured together, putting on gasser shows at tracks across the country and into Canada. But John could feel the future pulling him. The funny cars were where the real action was. In 1968, he sold the football to K.S. Pittman and made the leap. The 1968 Big John Mazmanian Barracuda was Big John's first funny car. John Foster built it. Candy red, naturally, gold leaf lettering. Keith Black supplied the engines, first a 426 Hemi, then increasingly exotic variations. Rich Cyrillunian, now out of the Army, came back to drive. At the second annual manufacturers meet at Orange County International Raceway in November 1968, the team proved they could compete at the highest level. 54 nitro funny cars showed up. This was an invitational event, the cream of the crop. Rich Cyrillunian drove Big John's Plymouth through round after round until they found themselves in an all-Plymouth final against Don Schumacher. They won, and they set low elapsed time of the meet, 7.48 seconds. It was the biggest victory of Big John's career. The following year at the NHRA U.S. Nationals, they made the funny car final, only to lose on a red light against Danny Ongaias in Mickey Thompson's car. But the message was clear. Big John could run with anyone. By summer 1970, the team was pushing boundaries nobody had reached before. With Keith Black's Hemi engine power and a thoroughly sorted combination, Rich Cyrillunian pushed the Big John Cuda to speeds that seemed impossible. During the 1970-71 season, the car ran 221.78 miles per hour. That made it the first funny car to exceed 220 miles per hour. The car was a marvel of period engineering. Torsion arm front end, Hallebrand quick change rear end with 4.30 gears, Crowler clutch, Lenco 2-speed transmission. The Hemi displaced 470 cubic inches, topped with a 671 supercharger and Enderle injector. Total weight, 1,720 pounds. Best elapsed time, 6.76 seconds. In the span of less than a decade, Big John had gone from a 12-second Corvette to a 6-second,
220-mile-per-hour nitro-burning monster.
By 1972, the pace was taking its toll. John was working on the race car until 4 or 5 in the morning, sometimes falling asleep with wrenches still in his hands. Then he'd wake up and put in a full day at the waste management business. The schedule was unsustainable. The final Big John Candy Red Cuda was built and campaigned in 1972. The driver for that last season was a former rival, Danny On Guys, the same man who'd beaten them on that red light foul at the Nationals. At the end of the season, John made a decision. He sold the operation to Parnelli Jones and walked away. It was time, he would say later. No regrets, just time. Big John Mazmanian retired from racing in 1972, but his legacy was just beginning. The man who'd bought a $50 Hemi from a wrecking yard and built it into an 824-horsepower record setter would be honored in ways he never expected. Model kits, die-cast collectibles, Hot Wheels, Frank Zappa lyrics, and eventually the ultimate recognition from the sport he'd helped define. In 1989, the National Hot Rod Association inducted Big John Mazmanian into their Hall of Fame. He was 63 years old by then, still towering at 6'5", still instantly recognizable to anyone who'd grown up watching his candy-red cars blast down the quarter-mile. The ceremony brought together the legends of the gasser era. Bones Below was there, Junior Thompson, Ohio George, the men who'd fought the cam wars and toured the match race circuit and built the foundation for professional drag racing. John accepted the honor with characteristic humility. He'd never been about ego. The cars spoke for themselves. He continued to attend nostalgia events for years after, showing up at the California Hot Rod Reunion at Famoso, the same track where he'd shocked the world with that 9.77 blast in 1964. Fans would approach him with stories. "I was there at Lions when you raced Cookie Cook. I built your Revell kit when I was 12. My dad took me to see the Willys at Pomona." John would listen to every story, shake every hand. The Armenian hospitality never faded. What happened to Big John's cars? The 1961 Corvette was restored and spent time in the NHRA Motorsports Museum before being sold at auction. In 2009, it fetched nearly $250,000, not bad for a car that started as a stock showroom vet. The Austin football survived too. After passing through K.S. Pittman's hands, who eventually replaced the Austin body with an Opel GT shell, the original body was saved. It was eventually acquired by Tom Wilford, then sold to Mike Guffey, who commissioned a full restoration. The car was offered at R.M. Sotheby's Hershey auction in 2017. The original Willys, that's the mystery. John said he could never trace it. Somewhere out there, the most famous gasser body in history might still exist, perhaps unrecognized in a barn, or possibly long scrapped. Or maybe it's been found and restored, waiting for the right moment to return to the limelight. Tribute cars and clones appear regularly at nostalgia events. You can watch recreation Big John Willys Coupes match race against K.S. Pittman clones at the California Hot Rod Reunion, keeping the rivalry alive for new generations. The Revell model kit was just the beginning. Hot Wheels released a Big John Mazmanian Barracuda as part of their Funny Car Summer set in 2002. Auto World produced a limited edition 1:18 scale die-cast of the 1972 Cuda, 750 units that sold out almost immediately. ACME Trading Company released a matching ramp truck in Mazmanian livery in 2024. The merchandise, the die-casts, the memorabilia, they all point to something remarkable. 6 decades after that first Willys run, Big John Mazmanian remains a name that sells. And then there's Frank Zappa. Billy the Mountain was released in 1972, the same year John retired. The song is a sprawling, absurdist epic about a mountain in Southern California that goes on a rampage. It's dense with inside jokes about Los Angeles culture, TV news anchors, local businesses, street names. And right there in the middle, Irwindale, 2:30 in the afternoon, Sunday, Monday, funny cars, Big John Mazmanian.
To be immortalized by Zappa was to be recognized as a genuine piece of Southern California identity, not just a drag racer, a cultural touchstone. Big John Mazmanian passed away on July 21, 2006. He was 80 years old. He left behind his wife Alice, the woman who'd been with him since he came home from the Pacific, who'd tolerated the midnight wrenching sessions, the weekends at the track, the all-consuming passion that drove him. He left behind his daughter Kathy, his son, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a family that had watched him build an empire, then step away from it with grace. But more than that, he left behind a legacy that continues to resonate with every gasser fan in the world. So what was it that made Big John special? Was it the cars? Certainly those candy-red machines were rolling works of art, beautiful beyond anything the competition could match. From the first '61 Corvette to the final Cuda, every car that carried the Mazmanian name was built to a standard that most teams couldn't dream of reaching. Was it the speed? The records spoke for themselves, from that first 9.77 blast at Bakersfield to the 220-mile-an-hour funny car barrier. John and his teams were always pushing limits. When everyone else was running Oldsmobiles, he went to the Hemi. When everyone else was running Willys, he built the football. He saw the future before it arrived and positioned himself to dominate it. Was it the showmanship? The tabloid wars, the match race tours, the understanding that drag racing was as much entertainment as competition? John mastered the media game before most racers even understood there was a game to master. Big John wasn't just a nickname, it was a brand, cultivated carefully through years of carefully placed advertisements and strategic rivalries. Was it the business sense? The family garbage company that provided the foundation for the racing operation, the sponsors he cultivated, the deals he structured? John proved you could build a racing empire without a factory budget, if you were smart enough. All of that mattered, but I think there was something else, something deeper. Big John Mazmanian proved that you could be a fierce competitor and still be generous, that you could beat someone on the track and then invite them to share your food in the pits, that winning didn't require being an asshole about it. The Armenian army wasn't just a nickname, it was a philosophy. Race hard, race clean, treat everyone with respect, and never forget where you came from. John Mazmanian came from East Los Angeles, from an immigrant family that had survived genocide and found a new home in California. From a wounded veteran's determination to build something beautiful after seeing the ugliest things war could show. From a $50 engine and a vision of candy apple red. He built something that lasted. Think about it. 60 years after that first Willys run at Bakersfield, people are still building tribute cars, still buying model kits, still gathering at nostalgia events to watch recreations of the cars that defined the gasser era. And somewhere, in a garage or a bedroom or a den, there's a kid who's never seen a gasser race in person, who's never smelled the nitro and rubber and burnt clutch material, who wasn't alive when these cars were gods of the quarter mile. But that kid is looking at a poster of Big John's candy red Willys, nose high, blower gleaming, paint shining like liquid fire. That kid doesn't know about the Battle of Leyte Gulf, doesn't know about the cam wars or the match race circuit, or the Armenian shish kebabs sizzling in the pits at Lyons Dragstrip. But they know that car is special. And that's Big John Mazmanian's legacy. That's what a $50 engine and a vision can build. That's what one man, one giant of a man, wounded in war and reborn in speed, gave to the sport of drag racing. And that's a legacy that will never fade to black.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Big John Mazmanian and his legendary candy red Willys, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which gasser legend should we cover next. Stone, Woods, and Cook, Ohio George Montgomery, K.S. Pittman? And if you're old enough to have seen any of these cars run in person, I want to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. Until next time, keep the shiny side up and the blower screaming.